In a kids' internment camp, the wristbands of numerous youths start to signal, advising them to get ready for tests that include utilizing their psyches to attempt to fall a Goliath tower at the focal point of the universe. In the meantime, in New York, 11-year-old Jake awakens in the wake of having bad dreams. Finding that there has been a tremor in the city, Jake frequently draws his fantasies, and among them are scenes of tormented youngsters, badlands, and some humanoid figures. His folks send him to the psychologist, whining that there has not been a lot of progress in the meetings. A colleague irritates Jake at school by taking his sketchbook, and Jake rushes at him without even batting an eye. Isolated by an instructor, Jake converses with the understudy guide, who lets him know that he can't differentiate among the real world and dreams. The kid demands that they are not dreams, and that a man in dark torments youngsters to cut down a pinnacle alongside creatures in counterfeit human skins. As per Jake, on the off chance that the pinnacle falls, the world will be dove into murkiness and fire. Yet the advocate thinks these explosions are because of the deficiency of his organic father over a fire-saving individuals. As a firefighter on the roads, Jake sees a bystander whose face looks saggy, as though he is wearing a cover. Yet before he can see any further, a vagrant cautions him that individuals are searching for extraordinary youngsters like him. For dim analysis, Jake figures out how to get on a transport and rides away just to meet his companion and neighbor Timmy. They go to Jake's loft. Also, find his mom and stepfather squabbling over him and his mentality at school. They propose to Jake going to a mental boarding facility for youngsters, something that bombshells the kid. Around evening time, Jake recollects the daring penance his dad made as a fireman. Also, chooses to set to the side the bad dreams issue. He takes care of his drawings and nods off, and afterward enters the fantasy land, where he keeps on having dreams of the man dressed in dark. Simultaneously, two gunfighters attempt to go up against the man dressed in dark, yet one of them falls. The more youthful one, Roland, can smother the man in dark. Sorcery, however, is still no counterpart for him. Jake awakens and tells Timmy about the gunfighter and how there's a home in New York that has something to do with him, yet his companion doesn't trust him and passes on him to stand up to a social laborer. At the mental facility in his family room, Jake sees something peculiar and understands that both the lady and her driver have markings like the phony animals in the fantasy land. So he requests that his mom assist him with pressing in private. He ineffectively remarks to her about the awful individuals. However, neither his mom nor his stepfather accept him. Not long prior to leaving, he figures out how to see that on the web somebody lets him know the location of the conceivable home of the gunfighter's home. So Jake consents to help out the circumstance. He asks those present for a few moments to search for his toothbrush, yet exploits this to get away from through the window. The driver pursues him across the housetops of the structures, yet Jake figures out how to make a quick forward and go down to the tram. Neglecting to focus on them, Jake converses with his mother on the telephone and tells her he has activities, until he shows up at the alleged place of the desperado. After entering, Jake figures out how to see some kind of door with a control board. He enters a similar number he generally dreams of, 1919, and the PC lets him know the objective will currently be mid-world. A gateway opens close to Jake, and not long before he ventures through it, the floor of the house smashes from itself. What's more, traps him to free himself. Jake figures out how to enter the entrance and arrives at a desert world with no civic establishments around, and with particularly molded storms somewhere far off. The man in dark shows up at his office, and his laborers let him know that there has been unapproved access at one of the entrances. Being from similar kid, they are attempting to catch Jake. Goes the entire evening strolling in the desert until he tracks down a little light somewhere far off, and when he shows up he views as a dim pit fire alongside some water. As Jake drinks it, the gunfighter shows up from behind and focuses a firearm at him. Frightening the youngster, Jake makes sense of that he has imagined about him, and despite the fact that he attempts to convince him, the gunman lacks the capacity to deal with his clarifications and leaves when Jake specifies the man dressed in dark. Roland nearly loses him a precipice, thinking it is a snare. Jake makes sense of that. He realizes he is Roland and that he doesn't have the foggiest idea about the whereabouts of the man dressed in dark. Roland trusts him and clears up for Jake that the man dressed in dark is a magician and that his genuine name is Walter. The man dressed in dark goes to the human world and sees that the evil presence house has been annihilated by a strong clairvoyant. When he looks for replies from one of his partners in crime, they let him know that just a human youngster with a strong sparkle might have managed the house, something that leaves Walter confounded. Roland and Jake advance toward a woodland where they see the remaining parts of a deserted carnival. They experience a gathering of Tahins somewhere far off for Walter's partners in crime, so they stow away and go for a more secure spot to remain. Roland figures out how to get ready supper and tells Jake that he doesn't have the foggiest idea what the offices around them are about. with the kid making sense of that. They are themed parks. They discuss the showdowns Roland and Walter have had in the past, and how the last one they had involved the deficiency of Roland's dad Walter goes to the specialists of the purported mental facility, castigating them for losing Jake. He then, at that point, trains them to annihilate one another and leaves, leaving his laborers battling in the road on the grounds that of his wizardry. Jake draws a guide where the dull pinnacle is situated in the focal point of the universe, encircled by huge number of universes. Roland makes sense of that the pinnacle is the main thing safeguarding the universe from boundless haziness and beasts, with Walter needing to annihilate it so he can administer in the new dull world. Jake proposes they cooperate to stop Walter, yet Roland is hesitant to have a accomplice. Around midnight, they see a light emission head towards the pinnacle, with one of the youngsters being utilized in Walter's office. A voice calls Jake as he dozes, making him walk into the woods where he finds his dad. Roland hurries to save him, realizing that it is a snare. What's more, when Jake contacts his dad, a dim wall shows up and attempts to release a beast. Roland goes up against it and confronts it. However, the wall assumes the presence of his own dad still. Roland thrusts at it and the wall vanishes. The gunfighter lets Jake know that it is an indication of the obscurity that Walter is attempting to pass into that world, and that their dads were never there with them. Accepting themselves safe, they experience another dim animal, which figures out how to repress Roland effectively. Jake takes the monster to the carnival, attempting to divert it while Roland figures out how to get away, and it attacks the animal and annihilates it. Roland acclaims Jake's fortitude, yet Jake just notification how Roland is harmed. Walter slips into Jake's home and figures out how to control his folks to let him know where the drawings are, rebuking them for their unfortunate treatment of the kid. Roland and Jake show up in a town where Roland's injuries are dealt with, and they tells them about Jake's dreams. There they notice how Jake's sparkle is novel and extremely strong. Indeed, even ready to guess others' thoughts, the soothsayer Ara figures out how to make an association with Jake. Seeing that Walter's refuge is in the northern Badlands, almost a half-year's excursion away, Jake makes reference to how the entries can get them there quicker since Walter's cronies are continuously looking for kids from different universes with them. They request to utilize the town entry, and despite the fact that some item, they say that the law is to never go against a gunman, so they choose to help them. Ara uncovers that Roland's spirit is in Walter's control and that he can no more be delegated. A desperado Roland admits that despite the fact that everything is valid, they should still attempt to protect the pinnacle no matter what. He leaves the spot and notification that his injuries are deteriorating and more terrible. Jake thus lets individuals know that Roland is a decent individual and ought to still be treated as a desperado, albeit the innovation is old. The gateway appears to function admirably, so the two of them prepare to go. Not long before that, the town starts to be gone after by Walter's colleagues, who put a match to and obliterate everything around. Jake assists a young lady with getting away from the thugs, while Roland guards the remainder of the town yet has difficulties from his wounds. Ara salvages him, yet they forget about Jake, so Roland enjoys some time off in the center of town to ponder his feet. Ara doesn't have the foggiest idea about what's happening, yet after a couple of seconds Roland shoots into the distance, figuring out how to stir things up around town. Who was hijacking Jake? Roland tells them not to stress over them, as the more Jake is there, the more risk they will be in, so the pair go through the gateway to Jake's Earth. Roland feels overpowered by everything around him, and Jake lets him know that they ought to get him clinical assistance right away anyway. Things are confounded by Roland's naivete in the human world, as the specialists let him know that he really endures from such a large number of illnesses. To let him go, they actually leave, and Jake gives Roland pain relievers and pop to improve it, with Roland saying he hasn't felt this great in years. Walter appears to Ara, controlling her to tell her where Roland and Jake are, so he chooses to go to Cornerstone Earth to follow them. Jake has the plan to ask the vagrant from Prior about the circumstance, yet the man lets him know that he lost his sparkle a long time back, so Jake should utilize his powers to peruse the man's recollections. They choose to go the entire way to Jake's home. However, there they track down his stepfather, oblivious on the floor and a dark consumed stain in the kid's room, thinking his mom died. To the man in dark, this is for Jake to utilize his sparkle so they can follow him, so Roland tells him he ought to close his brain and let the agony stream on the porch. Roland guarantees the kid that he will by and by deal with Walter himself as retribution for both of them. He lets him know that he hasn't presented gunman's ideology in years, and instructs it to him as they work on pointing with metal jars. They go to an ordnance store and get their hands on an adequate number of materials, yet Walter isolates them, leaving Roland caught in the store with him while Jake escapes from his partners in crime. Walter affronts and irritates Roland by letting him know that regardless of how diligently he attempts, each and every individual who strolls by him will die. Jake is grabbed however utilizes his try to please with Roland. They blindfold the kid so he will not uncover the area, yet Roland actually figures out how to track down him. Dispensing with those in his way, they open another gateway to Walter and Roland's reality, and Roland perceives how the man dressed in dark has the kid repressed, notwithstanding being encircled by many individuals. The gunfighter figures out how to get through against them all. Walter and Jake go through the gateway, and Jake is compelled to sink into the psyche-depleting machine, realizing that he alone has the capacity to cut down the dim pinnacle with no difficulty. The gunman utilizes all his weaponry to get through. No matter what the cronies being furnished and coming out of control, he utilizes all the weaponry. He figured out how to take from the store and figures out how to take shots directly at everybody present with the help of gas canisters. He causes a blast that delays the PC, shows that there are issues with Jake's power as he is opposing and keeping down, and Walter takes it upon himself to deter him from losing his soul, asserting that the desperado, as it were, thinks often about Jake so he can go up against his enemy. The kid is irritated with the deficiency of his mother, and it's enough to set off the light bar to the pinnacle. Roland defies quite possibly of Walter's nearest colleague. What's more, winds up on the roads watching the sky become red and the seismic tremors start. A vehicle takes out Walter's cohort and Roland is allowed to go with Jake, seeing that Jake currently has more power than ever to obliterate the pinnacle. Walter chooses to delay by going up against Roland, the man in dark purposes his powers to face Roland in any event, driving a piece of glass into one of his hands and leaving the gunman with only one hand accessible. Still, Roland sets up a battle against Walter, with the miscreant figuring out how to cut every one of his slugs out of the air. Jake endeavors to contact Roland intellectually before Walter conveys the final blow. Discussing the desperado's statement of faith, Roland figures out how to send off two slugs that run into each other, heading in a different path with perfect timing for one to hit Walter's heart. The desperado figures out how to protect Jake and annihilates the machine, saving not just the tower yet the whole universe. The two of them see the city attempting to adapt to the new fiascos, with broadcasts referencing how everything is gradually getting back to typical. They share some francs and the desperado inquires as to whether he needs to go with him to his reality, as there isn't anything left for him there. The kid is excited and says okay, presently being the gunman's new ward.